Doc Montgomery, for those of you who don't know him, has been helping me with all the diversity efforts here since the beginning. He himself is a real slacker. Started college classes at age 11.
Yeah.
Yeah, mechanical engineer, attorney, ran for the Senate, MBA, works at Boeing, day job, entrepreneur, amazing guy. Story goes on and on. That's just not even scratching the surface.
Amazing husband.
Amazing husband. His amazing wife, sitting right there. He's 35 years young. Okay, so anybody feel real small right now? And Enrique is no different. Without further ado, I think we'll let you guys kick it off.
Cool.
All right.
Great.
All right. We good? Good evening, everyone. As Ron has so graciously introduced me, my name is Dr. Jamar Montgomery. I've been with BFF since the beginning. It's so great to have everyone here because this is really a place for Black founders, funders to come together. As we know that the ecosystem here in Seattle is very big, but when it comes to actual resources for us, it can seem a little daunting at times. The more concentrated that we become, the stronger that we become, the better that we can create, better jobs and better opportunities that we can create for others. So it gives me a great pleasure and great honor to be here amongst everyone. But even more, we have a giant amongst our midst right now, none other than Mr. Enrique Godreau. So I'd like to welcome, can we give him a round of applause?
Thank you.
Did you want anything to drink or anything?
I've got
Okay,
it.
cool. I got
Thank
my
you.
tea here.
Perfect.
We got
Thank
a
you.
chance. We got a chance to speak earlier, and it's crazy because every time I get up here and speak to somebody, I'm always amazed by their story. And I don't know if everyone notices back over here, but we have our own little mini museum exhibit going on right here. Now, anybody that has technology like that, there's a story that's associated with it. The phones that we have, the places that we show up, all have their own story, but it's not often that we get to talk with people who were part of creating that story. Mr. Goudreau, go to my handy dandy notes here. There was a quote that you gave me when we first started talking, and you said, we have to look at the role that history plays in informing our future. So for our audience here, can you give us a little bit of background into who you are and some of your background story?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I have to tell you, I'm just really very happy and proud to have an opportunity to be here to speak with you. I've been waiting for an awful long time to be able to have a group that look like me, and that has actually, in my life, seldom, if ever, been the case. It's always been, there's a lot of arrows in the back associated with being a pioneer, and that's, you just kind of keep moving forward. And you just keep going forward and doing the best you can and looking forward to being able to get to a place where things like this happen, which is really incredibly exciting. I grew up in the South Bronx, in Bronx, New York, went to public high school in the Bronx. My first day of high school, social studies teacher asks, can someone, for my first class, what's the definition of stereotype? And someone got up and said, stereotype, a typewriter with speakers. And I was like, oh dear. And I decided right then and there that I was going to try and get out of high school as quickly as I could. And, and so I took some programming classes at Polytechnic in Brooklyn while in high school, and and ended up going to college at RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. They had a program called Higher Education Opportunity Program, where they were busy. The president of the university was a gentleman by the name of George Lowe, was the director of NASA that helped to get man on the moon in '69, and he was very focused on helping to increase the representation of underserved engineers in the space program. And so he came to RPI to help improve that, and one of the things that he did was establish programs like HEOP. And so that allowed me on a full scholarship to be able to go to RPI, where I studied initially electrical engineering until my junior year when this thing called computer graphics came about, and I decided to switch majors from computer science to computer graphics. and was really quite excited about that, but still didn't really know. In many ways, going to college was as much about getting away from the Bronx as it was about becoming an engineer. And then once you got there, I was like, oh, this is actually pretty interesting as well, and had a chance to work on some pretty interesting projects, and ended up working for Xerox actually initially. And at Xerox, Xerox was pioneering, and I knew about them as a computer science major and political science minor, that they were working on these computer systems at this lab in Palo Alto, California, that had invented the personal computer, a personal computer called the Xerox Alto. And I got to Xerox and I said, I'll start at Xerox in the engineering group and then over time see if there's a way that I can get to their Palo Alto Research Center. And I was fortunate enough after 3 years of doing engineering work to be able to move to Palo Alto, California and start doing work in computer, essentially digital media technology, what was at the time called computer-supported collaborative work. Did an awful lot of that work and it was fantastic. We were busy building digital media systems. And if you can imagine mid-'80s.
Bronx. RPI, and RPI is the oldest.
Yes, this year RPI celebrates its bicentennial, 200 years. It's the oldest engineering school in the country near Troy, New York.
Computer science and political science?
Correct.
Where did the political science come from?
Activism in the family, and recognizing very early on my father and my parents were very active in helping to ensure that we were always paying attention to what was being done and being vocal when we saw injustices being done. My family was one of the first to move from Puerto Rico to the United States in the 30s, created organizations that helped to support a variety of different bilingual education and other education systems. And so I have a long, strong history of activism in my family. Started the very earliest after-school lunch programs, started the very first, and this is in the 60s and 70s, started the very first programs that provided for essentially daycare services and childcare so that parents could work. And so I've always been really very focused on caring for others and making sure that others are cared for, but also believing that the right way to do that is through the system, not around the system. In order to do that, you have to understand the system. And for me, political science is very much about understanding established practices to be able to maximize them and utilize the tools of the existing systems for the benefit of more than the people that are potentially currently being served by those systems.
Okay, political activism, social activism, and now you're applying that to engineering.
Correct.
You're applying that to engineering. And so I would imagine that you had this deep-rooted history, and even I would even say maybe calling for making a difference in people's lives.
Yes.
And now you're, I would take it, what, 20, 18, 19,
Exactly.
20, now looking at Xerox, looking at this new world of technology.
Correct.
And how were you able to, I wouldn't say reconcile, but how were you able to stay on track with that calling and your own personal ambitions?
Yeah, it was, I call it the Gumby effect, where you're really stretched thin, where you're trying to focus on technical excellence, because that's what allows you, that's what gives you the power to be able to direct resources in the directions that you think matter, while at the same time being sensitive to making sure that the organizations and that the people that I believe are underserved are actually also being tended to. And so in Rochester, we did a program called Program for Rochester to interest students in science and math. We had just spent lots of money in deploying these $70,000 CAD workstations in 1985, and we're bringing students from underserved communities in Rochester to sit down at these workstations with the engineers that were learning how to use them. And this hadn't happened before, and it was really trying to help identify the common ground that was there in terms of the joy and satisfaction that the engineers were receiving in being able to interact with the community that they hadn't done before, and the common vehicle was this incredibly sophisticated technology that allowed them to have a conversation together. So it's always been about identifying the common linkages that bring things together. Okay. And at Xerox, and PARC was very much, it was a basic research facility, 220 researchers, and they were very much focused. There was no product delivery activity at all. It was all intended long-term research. What do you invent? And we were always introducing problems into our organization. One of the famous problems when copiers first became available is that they were hard to use, and executive assistants couldn't figure out the interface of how to use those.
So you mean it was more than just the toner running out? And
It was
the
more than
paper
just a ton,
jams
exactly,
happening
and
all that?
paper jams,
Okay,
and the
all right.
duplexing,
So just
and
the
color.
simple fact of just trying to put in the thing
Yes,
that, okay. all
exactly.
right.
And so, wait a minute, why are these things so complicated? And PARC did something brilliant. And what they did is they hired cultural anthropologists. And what they did was they were doing essentially ethnographic analysis. So they decided to put video cameras and watch the people that were using the copiers run into the problems that they were doing. And it was that excellent, and that happened during my time at Xerox. And the light bulb that went off for me then, that has really propelled me for the rest of my career, is that people are what matters. Technology is interesting, but the most interesting thing of all is the boundary between technology and people. And it's all about the use. If that's not right, nothing else matters. And so I've been really maniacally focused on understanding that relationship between what technology is able to deliver, but more importantly, the value that it delivers to people. And before that, it had been, the word that we used at Xerox was techno-macho. It was this notion that you can build technology, and yeah, it can do really cool things, but it's a so what. And the value of the so what is something that Xerox PARC afforded me an opportunity to really spend an awful lot more time thinking about, and being able to then blend that into a variety of different life experiences, both there and then beyond. And,
So after you made it easier for every one of us to use copiers,
yes, yes.
what did you find? You said you utilized
Ethnographers,
right? So
exactly.
ethnic, people who study ethnic.
Ethnography is the use of video records to really study personal and people interactions.
Okay.
And so,
All right, see,
yeah.
now I just learned something. Just going.
It's an entire field, yeah, within the
Okay.
area of anthropology in terms of the study of people. And as we've been deploying more technology, it's just really important not to make assumptions about what people are doing, but to watch and to study and to live it and to actually put those boots on and understand what the problems are, because it's an understanding those friction points that the magic really happens. Just over and over again, that the magic happens of being able to solve problems that were actually easily solved if there had been awareness that it was a problem. And that just hasn't happened before.
And working at PARC, you said that it's basically just a research
It
facility.
was a research facility, exactly.
Research as in, are you looking for problems to go research, or are these problems that you as a group are responsible? Xerox has a problem, right? Xerox
Yes.
has a problem. As you said, there was an issue with how to utilize the copiers.
Yes.
That was something that was brought to you, and your team was responsible for figuring that out?
It was actually, and that was candidly a point of tension, because the researchers at PARC were very much more focused on delivering and driving their own direction for their research. And so the work that we did at PARC was really driven by what we thought were the most pertinent problems. And it just so happened that every once in a while, those problems happened to overlap with business problems that Xerox was also trying to solve. And generally speaking, we were focused on problems related to information technology. The lab that I was at is called the System Concepts Lab. It's the laboratory that invented Smalltalk 80. Smalltalk 80 was the first programming language, object-oriented programming language in the world. My boss's boss, Adele Goldberg, was the member of that laboratory, and she has a distinction of having given the demonstration to Steve Jobs that showed him windows and icons and a mouse and a network. And his key question was, why aren't you productizing this? And that just hadn't been the tradition of Xerox. And so he left, went away, and the rest is history with respect to the deployment of the technology that had been invented at Xerox. But even that paradigm was very much about, what do we think are interesting problems to have? Alan Kay was a member of that lab, and he famously said, the best way to predict the future is to invent it.
To invent it.
And we did that. And so we spent time over and over again just inventing new things. We took a third of our lab, moved them from Palo Alto to Portland, Oregon, and the problem we introduced was, you're one laboratory. Invent technologies to help you work better as one. And so we were the first ones to deploy video conferencing systems in the mid-'80s over 56 kilobit lines. It was one channel that linked our two labs together, and we just did what we needed to do. How do you author a paper together? How do you have shared drawing tools? So the electronic whiteboard came out of that work and the work that Scott Elrod and others at PARC invented. The shared whiteboard, the shared drawing tools, the use of video to be able to capture and record documents. We know about being able to search for words in a document, but what if I'm looking for a document that has a coffee stain on the top right-hand corner of the paper? How do you find that document?
How do you find that document?
You can use video, right? You can use video, because video knows that document was here, and then ultimately it ended up moving to that pile over there, which is the important pile. And so we were working in a place where we were, and ironically it was the year 1984, and the year of George Orwell and Big Brother, but we were working within the constructs of a laboratory. And so the idea of being able to manage and explore what we were doing within the safe confines of a laboratory allowed us to explore that. But there were times where we probably didn't ask as many of the social questions as probably needed to be asked to understand the practical implications of some of the technologies that we were being deployed. Now, obviously, that wasn't our primary charter, but we probably could have spent a cycle or two thinking about some of those issues.
Absolutely. Okay, so you have this young man that's now charting out life from the Bronx.
Mm-hmm.
That is now working in Palo Alto.
Yes.
That is working on the forefront and cutting edge technology, not only for businesses, but just in, hey, this is a problem, I feel it needs to be solved. That's a lot of freedom.
It was.
To be given at that age. Now, how long were you at PARC?
I was at Xerox for 10 years and at PARC for 7.
So out of your entire 10-year period, most of it was at PARC.
Most of it was at PARC. Correct.
Is any of the technology that you have over there from that era?
It is, actually, yeah. So this is the Xerox Alto is the first personal computer. You'll find one at the Smithsonian and at the Computer Museum in San Jose. And this is my Alto drive that I used for 3 years computing there. So this has 2.5 megabytes of data. Okay, so my cell phone is a 512 pixel that has 200,000 times more storage than this Alto drive has. No, it's actually megabytes.
No, we looked it up on Wikipedia.
Yeah, yes. So it really is megabytes. So it's 2.5 megabytes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So that device is yeah. So that's my hard drive, and so my data's on there. And so if I want to get it out, I have to go to the Smithsonian, jump a red velvet fence, and boot up the Alto to yank my bits off of it.
Wow. I could only imagine. I could only imagine like the memories that you have.
Oh, it was really powerful. One of the things that I did is I took a social service leave of absence from Xerox PARC in 1990. Apple was doing a big initiative called the Apple Classroom of Tomorrow, imagining what it might mean to deploy their technology in the classroom. And so I partnered with a researcher at the Institute for Research and Learning to explore the ideas of multimedia authoring for middle school students. And so we developed an interactive multimedia authoring system on a HyperCard stack on a Macintosh computer and deployed that in a Ravenswood Middle School in East Palo Alto, California, one of the most underserved communities in all of the Bay Area. And the idea was, let's actually understand what the process of creation is like. Middle school students are used to consumption of content, but what happens if you give the tools to them, and again, this is 1990, and allow them and put them in a position of authoring and creation? What is that experience like, and how does that impact the pedagogy of their learning experiences? And I'll always remember we took a field trip and asked them to put together a HyperCard presentation on their visit to the zoo. And so we had cameras and Mac recorders and scanners, and we could supply all of the tools that allowed them to easily bring these presentations. We got back from the zoo, and they plugged in their video to watch the video, and it was all of this kind of videos. Wait a minute, how come this doesn't look like television? And so that's because you have to produce it, you have to edit it, you have to create it. And they had never imagined that there was actually a production process that was involved in the realization of the final outcome. And it was an incredible experience to see that aha moment, and then to be able to provide a set of tools that allow them to engage in that creative process.
That's interesting because hamburgers don't come from the hamburger tree, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. There seems to be this theme that I'm seeing about you now actually being involved with the technology. So at Park, you were doing a lot of research, but that really required for you to be down and dirty with the technology and building things up. And then having that experience with the kids, and they're just like, hey, we have access to this technology, we're finally utilizing it, but it's not, the end product is not what they thought that it was going to be. Okay. I think that now we're starting to, there's a lot of technology and a lot of tools that are available to us, but we aren't really utilizing those tools, and it seems somewhat overwhelming.
It is.
That looks like a set of overwhelming list technology that's right there, but it represents a timeline. What has been the benefit of, what has been the greatest benefit that you've seen from being directly involved with the technology versus just reading about it versus being on the sidelines? Yes,
no, it's a good question. For me personally, that experience with the kids at Ravenswood Middle School was really transformative because no one had really thought about, we were using text and we're using graphics, the idea of using video and animation inside of a communicative document that many of us would use had not really been broadly considered. Windows was described, and IBM describing this, the multimedia PC was the description of the day, and Microsoft launched an interactive CD-ROM called Encarta. That was the first encyclopedia that was on a CD-ROM that allowed people to see something that they controlled. It wasn't something coming over the rabbit ear antennas. It wasn't something coming over cable television. It was something that provided a one-foot experience of you, a mouse, a computer, and you could explore and go to the places that you could see. And to see the impact that had at a kid level was really powerful. And so I left Xerox after 10 years to move here to Seattle to join the Aldus Corporation. Aldus was a pioneer of a desktop publishing solution called PageMaker. And PageMaker was a pioneering desktop publishing tool that allowed anyone to create high-quality text publications. So it was text and graphics. But by then, with the CD-ROM, it was the time to really move into interactive media. And so I came on board to help expand the opportunities and introduce different digital media into that business, into those solutions. But when I got here, I found that we were too far behind. There were other competitors, Macromedia and Adobe and others, that were just ahead of us. And so in that make versus buy decision, I was a strong advocate, along with our vice president of engineering, that we move forward with acquiring a technology.
And how many melanated people did you come into contact with during your experience at Park and now moving to Aldus?
What do you ask a question again? I'm sorry.
Melanated folks or black folks?
Yeah, exactly. Mr. Robert, Robert, I can count it on one hand. So there were 21 of us that went into the HEOP program at RPI in a class of 1,100. So it was 20 out of 1,100. And while there, I was fortunate. I was pretty active, again, because going back to my United Bronx parents' days. So we started the Rensselaer Society of Black Engineers then, and it's still going today. We started the Latin Students Association. It's still going today. And so we were pretty active. We started the Office of Minority Student Affairs. It's still going today. And so many of the things that, and we were the first class. There's been other HEOP classes since then, but we were the first, and we were just laying a foundation to make it easier for others. Moving from the heart of Philadelphia, moving from the South Bronx, moving from Washington, D.C. into Troy, New York, where there's not a lot of people that look like you.
Even Chocolate City?
Even Chocolate City, my friend. Yeah, it can be pretty daunting. And so we spent a lot of time laying a foundation and an infrastructure that was pretty powerful. And it resulted, I mentioned George Lowe was this president while I was there. The penultimate president of RPI is a woman by the name of Shirley Ann Jackson. And Dr. Shirley Ann Jackson was the first African-American woman to earn a PhD in physics from MIT. She then went to run the the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and for about 15 years, she was the president of RPI and really made a significant impact on helping to improve the entire research profile of that university by doing two things. And at the core is really recognizing the power of diversity and the power of difference of opinion, and embracing that at an academic level and having that be a corpus of what a sound and whole research program might look like. And the benefits of that are still being felt today. RPI just a month ago received the first quantum computer of any university in the world. And they are absolutely at the forefront of research activities across a myriad of activities. But for us, going from George Lowe to Shirley Jackson was proof that some of the seeds that were laid 30, 40 years ago to be able to create an experience where that everyone could see themselves in the work, whether you're focused on the science or the culture or the social experience, all of those elements are represented for a high school student that's trying to find themselves in a higher education environment.
Absolutely, absolutely. You said that you moved from PARC, from Palo Alto, now
Moving to Seattle.
and you joined a company called Aldus.
No, that's right.
Aldus
Yes.
Corporation.
Yes.
What were you doing in Aldus?
At Aldus, I was on the engineering team,
Okay.
helping to drive this interactive media strategy.
Okay.
And so my goal was to leverage the experience that I had from Xerox PARC in the research environment, and my personal goal was to move into productization of some of those initiatives and ideas.
Sounds like you're a little frustrated, or maybe poignant.
Yeah, there weren't easy ways to be able to take the research ideas that we were working on at PARC and find ways of productizing
Got you.
those. A year before I arrived at PARC, John Warnock and Chuck Geschke left to start Adobe. Bob Metcalf left to start 3Com, a network company. So there's been a history of folks exploring ways of ensuring that they can dent the world with their ideas for the benefit of all, even if there wasn't a way to do that within the framework of Xerox, unfortunately.
It sounds like the kind of entrepreneurial
Yes.
spirit that you had, and just not being able to really continue to expand on that with, hey, we created this great product, we created this great widget or product or service or whatever, and let's find a way of making this and making a business out of it.
Correct.
And not being able to have that opportunity.
And not being able to do it there. And in a way that was accessible to others. And that
Gotcha.
was, so in that initiative, as a member of the engineering team at Aldus, okay, this graphic thing isn't going away. It's going to get bigger rather than smaller. And so how can we find a way to lower the barrier even more? And the beauty of what was happening at Brown University is that there was a group of engineers, there was only 10 of them, that had a small company that were focused on this thing called motion graphics. And the idea that you can take graphic elements and actually interpolate them, and if you play it at 30 times a second, it turns into video. And wow, that's really pretty interesting. And so the name of that company was the Company of Science and Art, and the name of that product is After Effects. And I'm really proud that that was 30 years ago, and After Effects is still sold today by Adobe, and it's the only product that survives from the Aldus acquisition, because after doing that work, Adobe acquired Aldus, and the only product that remains today from that acquisition, and there were many of them, is After Effects. And it really speaks to the power of democratizing access to high power capabilities. And so on a personal computer, on a Mac 2, you can create visual effects that are just extraordinary. And so if you look at the Jurassic Park movie, there's a weather map scene there where the storm is coming in while Newman's trying to get out. That weather map was done with After Effects, and that was the first time that it was used in a motion picture, and since then it's been used in hundreds of motion pictures and is actually the tool of art that is used for motion graphics, because you can get away from using high-cost equipment, and on a desktop, anybody can become a high-quality motion graphics expert, and
Wow.
that was really rewarding.
Wow, okay. Did you stay with Aldus after they got acquired?
We did. I stayed with Aldus for a little bit. I created the dynamic media groups. I was responsible for Adobe Premiere and After Effects. We had a couple of other products. Half the team was in Seattle, half the team was in San Jose, California.
Okay.
So I was at SeaTac Airport a lot.
Okay. What's a lot? Every week?
Twice a week. Yeah, twice a week. So I'd come home and twice a week. And I lived there for years, and so I knew the area, but I didn't want to do that. And so that's when I left, and I was thinking about amplification. So I'd gone from research to a product to managing a group of products, and I was thinking, where else can I go? And so the other place I'd go was industry. What can I do at an industry level? And that's when I joined Gartner Group. And so I joined Gartner Group as the analyst responsible for digital media. At that time, there were interactive television trials going on around the world, famously Orlando, trying to help us. They were trying to figure out how to allow people to order sweaters on their television using their remote control, for example. And so I was like, there may be better applications of this infrastructure. And mercifully, this giant TCP/I bus came rolling by that allowed us to say, look, focus over here. on TCP/IP rather than the architecture that you're building, because you will get an awful, you cannot imagine what applications your viewers, your customers really want to use this technology for. And so rather than you being in the position of directing what they do, why don't you create an empty channel that allows them to do whatever it is that they want to do? And it worked. And so they shut down the interactive television trials, and we began then to see applications of interactive media related to education. We began to see some video conferencing. So the original early desktop video conferencing solutions started to emerge during that period of time. DVD started to emerge. Rob Glazer had created Real Networks at that time. And I remember I bet my other analysts, I wrote a research note that said, this is really going to redefine the world, and the whole notion of streaming video is going to be, you cannot possibly imagine how big a technology this is going to be. And there were 8 other analysts that said, you are nuts, there's no way that this is going to happen. And so I bet all of them, and if that company's still in existence in a year, I will pay you some money. And Maria Cantwell was the VP of marketing at Real Network at the time, and sure enough, they were here, they were there, and they survived. And look at streaming media now. Yeah. I think just had this premise that once you know you can get to your bits, everything changes. Right? And back then, bandwidth was really expensive. But once you know that you can get to your bits, wherever they may be, everything changes. And that's in fact what's happening, and we're still seeing that at scale. My father worked at IBM for many years, and I'd go to the data room, and then the server rooms, and all the data was there, and we had these green phosphor terminals, 80 characters, 24 rows, and that's how you use the terminal. And then the personal computer said, no, move that onto the desktop. And that worked great, but if you have a 100,000 person company, you have 100,000 desktops you have to manage. And this looks complicated. Sun Microsystems create client-server architecture that says, no, you can actually go back to having a centralized computer. Ethernet connects that, and that worked pretty well. Now we're in the age of today's National NVIDIA Day, for all that celebrate, where you're actually focused on artificial intelligence and cloud computing that centralizes all of those services, and that's only possible because we have networks that guarantee us that we can get to our bits wherever we happen to be. And so now it's an important, going back to the social aspect of making sure that everyone that needs access to the bits has the ability to get to their bits, not just a small selection of folks for the applications they might want, but ensuring that everyone that needs access to their bits has that and has the ability to operate on them for whatever purposes they might want to be using them for.
Okay, so you had direct experience finding the limits, finding the opportunities of utilizing this particular technology, and being one of the pioneers of uses of the internet. Now, what makes you say, all right, I'm leaving Gartner, I'm leaving Gartner, and are you continuing on that mission of giving people access to their bits?
I am.
How?
So essentially, I was at Gartner, and the internet service, the internet was launched while I was there. Microsoft pivoted from the desktop computer to, we're now going to pursue Internet Explorer and their internet strategy. And so I was one of the 9 analysts responsible for helping to track that transition. And so in that regard, Gartner's brand really afforded me an opportunity to meet with the CEOs, CTOs, CIOs of some of the world's largest telecommunication and computing companies, advising them on some of the opportunities that were in front of them with the use of that technology. I enjoyed that, but I felt I didn't have a keyboard. All I could do was advise, and then I'd walk away, and they could do what they wanted with the advice. And I wanted to find an opportunity where, I actually believe that there might be some things I can be more intentional. So where is the place where I can actually be more intentional? And that's where I collaborated with my 2 co-founders of Voyager Capital to build Voyager Capital. And so in that regard, now we have the opportunity to put money where mouth is and actually support and sponsor entrepreneurs that are actually breathing life into a digital media strategy that helps to distribute these capabilities while building interesting startup companies in the process.
What was that catalyst? What was that catalyst from? Because it seemed like you had maintained this kind of entrepreneurial spirit of being in a corporate environment, whether it was a research to acquisitions to being an analyst and consultant and advisor, to now what made you decide that you wanted to now get into venture capital or get into investing?
Yeah, it was afforded an opportunity to do that. So it was we have this term affordances. And so this was a place where instead of simply providing advice or needing to get behind the keyboard directly, one of the beauties of technology is amplification, I believe. That. So you can put a little bit of input and get a lot of value and output on the other side. Venture capital is one of those industries that affords you an amazing amount of amplification. And so I viewed it strategically from a personal perspective as a way of being able to leverage a set of experiences and insights around themes that I had been fortunate to participate in, and then being able to do that at scale. And from my perspective, it was really no different. It was simply a different place in the food chain and a different place in the life cycle of the formation of new and interesting ideas. It took a while to shift, and I think that's one of the things that people underestimate. What's involved in going from an operating role to an investing role? Those are worlds apart. In an operating role, you're here and you want to get there, and you think about product requirement documents and customer requirements documents and beta testing and marketing and promotion, and it's always in that direction. And when I first started as a VC, that's how I viewed the world. But I quickly began to understand that the role of a VC, you can't run a company from a board seat. The purpose of being an investor and a director is actually primarily providing air cover, is actually looking the other way and providing risk mitigation services. What are the things that potentially stand in your way of being successful with your venture? That could be the wrong person, not having the right team, not thinking about the right product, focusing on the wrong market, being undercapitalized, having competitive threats from other areas. It's essentially entrepreneurs head down, focused on building their business. As a director and investor in a company, I was always spending time looking about all of the things that the entrepreneur wasn't and just making them aware of what those things were.
When did you start Voyager Capital?
1996. Yeah, so 1996.
Which piece of technology were you
Yeah,
using
so
at that time?
1996, we are coming into the Palm Pilot era. Yeah.
Let me check my Palm
Yeah, my
Pilot.
Palm Pilot, exactly right. That was a sweet device, and the issue here is that you think you're done. You see a new piece of technology, like, here it is. This is it. Like the automobile. We're done. We don't need to do anymore. It just does everything we need it to do until you start having those experiences. Gosh, this thing doesn't actually have any audio. This thing doesn't have any video. This thing doesn't have XYZ. And so, wait a minute. It could have those things. Those things are opportunities. And that really sparks the entrepreneurial genesis to really continue creating and continue refining and continue optimizing when it's founded by the right spirit.
But it had a stylus.
But it had a stylus.
Do you remember the cartoon strip, the VC?
Yes, I do.
And there was the one where he goes like this with his stylus. That means talk fast.
Talk faster. Exactly.
Absolutely. We got your Palm Pilot.
Yes.
We got your Palm Pilot. You're out there now looking at companies to invest in.
Yes.
And what was your first investment?
One of my very first investment was actually a company called Two Way. That was actually, we were co-investors with Adobe, oddly enough. And the purpose of it was a company here in Seattle focused on gathering user feedback. And so it was a survey, online user survey. There are lots and lots of times where you need to collect a lot of information very quickly. And in 1997, 98, it was really hard to do that. Our canonical case was Hewlett-Packard was moving from one facility to another. Is everybody packed? You can call everybody, or you can send a survey out. And back then, these tools just didn't exist. And so our tools were designed to allow anyone to create a survey and be able to deliver that to the marketplace, to be able to collect the feedback, aggregate it, and then act on it.
What made Voyager Capital special?
The fact that we were all operator background. And so I think that as opposed to coming from theoretical places, we all had experience that was deeply tied to running the business, whether it was as a CFO of a publicly traded company or as a product marketing manager for MS-DOS, working directly with Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer. Those are experiences, and so the three of us all brought a set of skills. To me, venture capital is about renting your eyes. And by that, we have LPs and investors that trust our ability to see things that don't exist and people that have a passion around things that don't exist and say, my eyes are telling me that I believe that there's a market opportunity and that you as an entrepreneur are well qualified to pursue it. And so in many ways, LPs pay VCs to use our eyes and our experiences to identify things that other people might not value because you can't go to the store and buy it.
Where was one of those experiences where those good eyes came in handy?
I would say one of our early investments was in a company called Aquantive. So Aquantive is the pioneer of third-party ad placement. And so we have to go back to the times of Mark Andreessen and Netscape and the World Wide Web. And imagine that this screen is actually a web page. And the idea was if you have a web page, there's probably a little corner of the web page that you can use for advertising. So we're going way back. You could make money by placing ads on these web pages. But these advertisers don't know how to do that. And so if there was a company that could say, just like you place an ad on radio and in a newspaper and on television, if you could place an ad on a web page, you would get access to a different set of eyeballs. And Aquantive was a pioneer in helping to deliver the right ad to the right person at the right time. And essentially the idea there was, and by now the internet isn't born yet, really. It's a very few people. It's a domestic phenomenon. It's only really popular in the United States. It doesn't exist broadly in the rest of the world. Do we think that the internet is going to be big or not? Yeah, we think the internet's going to be big. Do we think web pages are going to stay around? Yeah, we think. Do we think people want advertising and are going to use that as a way of subsidizing? Yep, we think all of those things are true. So what could stand in the way of that? Maybe some regulatory activities, maybe adoption rates for the way that people adopt the web. But if we fast forward 20 years, and let's say that internet advertising is 5% of all advertising worldwide, that's a big number. Nope, I think what we see here is a group of people that understand the market, have the right technology, and have the skill set to be able to go enable these capabilities for a broad market space. And so that would be one example of seeing something, seeing people, seeing opportunity, and deciding to, yep, this is something we really want to support.
Okay, I just have a couple more questions, and then I'm
Yes.
going to open it up to the audience.
Yes, please.
How long were you involved in Voyager Capital?
I was at Voyager for just under 17 years.
So what that puts us at
2012? Exactly, 2012.
2012? Okay.
Exactly right.
So that puts us at 2012. So between 2012 and now, what have you been up to?
Yep, and so a couple of things. I think in the one area that I want to focus on most is my experience with an organization called UpGlobal. And so again, this relationship between, to me, entrepreneurship is innovation and monetization. That's what innovation, new ideas, and monetization. How do you actually make money from that? And there was this group UpGlobal that was focused on delivering programs like Startup Weekend, Startup Next, Startup Week, really associated with, like the work I did with the Ravenswood Middle School, of bringing technology to a group of people that wouldn't normally think about being entrepreneurs. And I'm really excited about being able to afford opportunities to folks that otherwise wouldn't have them. And so those programs were very attractive to me. We delivered 1,200 Startup Weekend programs in over 160 countries around the world.
Wow.
In a single year. Right?
Wow.
Now, this is on a yearly basis. And programs all over the world. The first such program in Havana, Cuba. We bussed Palestinians into Jerusalem for a 50-50 Startup Weekend event. We had events in Africa where, we try and figure out why people wouldn't sign up for the program in Ghana. What's going on? What's going on? The problem was that the goat herder actually owned the town and everybody was paying attention because they drove their income. And so the country manager, the region manager for EMEA said, the problem is that they're afraid to participate because the goat herder is going to think of them as a threat. So they went to the goat herder and said, hey, why don't you be a member of the judge that decides which of these plans is the best plan? Incorporated it. They were sold out in no time at all. The programs that emerged from that dynamic were just incredible. But it's this whole notion that from an entrepreneur's journey perspective, you're creating opportunities for people to say, I've been buying stuff all my life. I've been a consumer all my life. Do I have what it takes to be a producer? What's involved in actually creating something? I've been staring at that problem and staring at that problem, and I don't know what to do about it. But my God, it's a problem. Other people have to see this problem. At some point, how do you unlock the opportunity to get that person to roll up their sleeves and decide to enter an entrepreneur's journey to go solve that problem and not just change their life, but change our lives in the process? And so my excitement was in then taking the venture capital experience and then bringing it to a broader community focused on understanding this mysterious thing that you still can't go to school to learn how to do. You can get a business degree, but you can't really go and learn and get an entrepreneurship degree. Not yet. It's right at that boundary. It's just starting, and that's because no two businesses are alike. And so in the strategy behind them, you have the Jeffrey Moore Crossing the Chasm. You have the Clayton Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma. You have different models for ways of taking something that doesn't exist and making it come to life and building value. And being able to bring that not just to folks that go to engineering school and not just to folks that go to business school, but bringing it to everyone everywhere, that really excites me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Oof. Oof. Just thinking about just the work that you've done all around the world with helping entrepreneurs. So it seems like there's a lot of opportunities all around us. It's just whether or not we're in the right place to see it. And what I mean by right place is not just geographically, but just in our current life journey. So my last question before I open it up to the audience is, what scares you the most about the future? Or what is one of the problems that we need to start thinking about now so it won't be a problem in the future?
I spoke earlier about amplification.
Yeah.
And the power of these technologies as they've evolved. It's truly incredible in terms of what they afford us an opportunity to do. And we're now, right now, I think at a precipice in the sense that the machines are really very capable of being able to do tremendous things, but we're still the same people. We haven't evolved. Yes, a millennial can solve the flashing 12 problem before a boomer can. But in the context of truly being able to process faster or engage faster, we're not any faster. We're not any different than we've always been, but these machines did follow Moore's law and doubled in capacity in a very short period of time. And the machines are very capable. And so the question is, and these information streams are coming at us individually and one at a time. And so you walk the streets, and it's a very personal experience. It's my information. We believe 1984 and that kind of Big Brother, and so it's about me. And so we've developed personal computing. But what would it mean to have the technology support interpersonal activities and group activities and interpersonal computing? I don't see an awful lot of activity in and around that, and so I'm concerned about continued isolation as a result of these machines becoming more and more powerful. But the other element is this notion of information streaming. And so because you have all of these vendors that are providing individual sources and individual social media streams and email and billing services, we are left to the job of managing the integration of all of these streams. In 2050, I can see the New York Times headline saying, those poor people in 2010 to 2030 must have been going crazy trying to manage all these independent information streams that were coming at them without the use of any technology. How did they manage their lifestyle? How did they disconnect? How did they certify that some things they were seeing were true and other things weren't? How on earth did they really manage? Those were the really early days. Thank you for those pioneers. But now, fortunately, we have a set of tools that allow us to think about this in a more responsible way than those pioneering days of 2010 to 2030.
You got a point there, because I definitely got an email address with 230,000 unread messages. So,
here's my scary part. I turned on my Palm Pilot to bring it to this doc, and I opened it, and it told me I had 24 unanswered messages. But the last time I turned it on was in 2004.
They're still waiting for a response from you.
I'm worried.
Enrique, this was...
About your car warranty.
This was great, and I want to open it up to our audience for questions. This has been absolutely incredible for me. Yes, and by the way, introduce yourself.
Please do this on the microphone for the people at home.
Oh, there we go. Appreciate you.
One of the things that I'm kind of curious, because you say
96.
and I think post George Floyd, that's when we saw a lot of movement and people trying to bring, underrepresented people in the DC world. But I wonder, from your experience at that time, how was it like to not only raise capital, but just to have people willing to bet on you, just beyond your experience? So I appreciate that.
No, thank you for that question. It was hard. It was emotionally taxing, because on the one hand, my education and my training pushes me to push the envelope of the science and of the funding and of the progress and of the results. As a venture capitalist, everybody has a boss, and as a venture capitalist, your boss are your LPs, your limited partners and the investors in your fund. And so we had to convince them that we were a team that was able to identify promising opportunities, and we were successful in that effort. And back then, I think that the background of the team, just because it was such an anomaly, and we had been successful individually, as well as a couple of us had worked together, that we were able to reassure them that A, we knew what we were doing because of our past track record of having investing, that there was a clear opportunity, and I think that was a big part of it. So let's rewind to 1996. It's Seattle, Washington. You have Jeff Bezos he still has hair, right? And he's still down on 2nd Avenue, and Amazon is just starting, and Microsoft is making this pivot, and the McCaw family's here with the cellular technology. And again, once you can get to your bits, everything changes. And so there was a huge allure around what Seattle was all about. But Silicon Valley was the center of activity, and then there was the East Coast. And so there weren't a lot of things we were one of the first 2 funds that were actually established in 96, 97 to focus on the information technology opportunity here as a venture capital fund. And so from that perspective, institutional investors view their portfolio as an asset allocation exercise. And in addition to an allocation for emerging managers, which is what we were when we had Roman numeral 1 and 2 as our funds. Our first fund was 50 million, our second fund was 200 million, our third fund was after the dot-com bust, and that was about a $105 million fund. So we had about $350 million in the management at the time with different dollars. And so their notion was, all right, we have emerging managers, but what was as intriguing was the idea of being able to invest in the Northwest, because they didn't have investments that were here. And so they wanted some of the juju that was potentially available here at the time that you saw large companies that were really starting to mature and create new opportunities. John Cook, who now runs GeekWire, was at the Seattle PI in those days, and he wrote an article that I still have, which talked about where are the baby bills? And the question was really, that was the title of the article, and the question was, where are the spin-outs from alumni from Microsoft? And he could really only at that time point to 2, Rob Glazer and Brent Fry. And those are the only 2. But if you rewind and again look at history to help inform the future, in Silicon Valley, Hewlett-Packard was formed in 1945. It wasn't until 1969 that the first spin-out from Hewlett-Packard happened. And the reason for that is, during that period of time, everybody's just holding on to the rocket for as long as you can. It's going great, things are going fabulous, and then you reach an apogee, and then instead of innovation, it becomes about optimization, and that's when you start looking around and start thinking, I wonder if there's something else I can do with all of this great skill set I just delivered, potentially my own capital, and that's when you start seeing organizations splinter off. Microsoft's time frame was not that dissimilar from that. And so it took a little bit longer, but not a huge amount longer, for those spin-outs to start to develop. And once that happened, then you had a significant influx of capital coming here. So the opportunity, I think, helped to shadow some of the dynamics of the fact that I didn't really look like many of the other GPs that were here. And so that was a significant. One of my biggest regrets is that in addition to the capital coming that way, the entrepreneurs also didn't really look like me. And so that was a significant impact as well. It was people from, let me describe it as the same old places, in the sense of same academia, same background, mostly same academic background, that were most pursuing these entrepreneurship activities. And it was a bit of a challenge in that beginning, and so there weren't very many folks that really looked like me during that period of time, and so I just focused on execution there, but then finding other ways of being able to stay true to a personal mission of giving back. And so I was involved in other kind of social activities around the community as a way of making sure that I still had my shovel in that camp as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I did have a question. You shared a lot about your experience, both from a technical product and business experience. And I'm curious, as a founder myself, according from your experience, what do you think makes a technology or a startup poised for success in the market? What are some of those metrics from experience that you really look at and can tell the get-go that this could actually work?
Yep, and that's a good question. And I think every situation is different, but if I, at a high enough elevation level, the relationship between the technology and the business model is something that I came to appreciate more. And so oftentimes, and Clayton Christensen speaks about this, he coined the term disruptive technologies, where you have new technologies that really just change everything. And in many ways, NVIDIA is an example of that. But they didn't really start out there. But this notion that, and then where is the innovation and where is the disruption? And I used to believe, coming from a technical background, that you really needed disruptive technology and an innovative business model. But the biggest successes are innovative technology with disruptive business models. The business model ends up, in more times than not, actually providing greater disproportional value for companies. And if you can look at and think about both public companies as well as later stage companies, my God, the power of having a disruptive, and if you need more proof than that, look at, Google provides some search services. It wasn't until they did an acquisition that showed them that advertising was the way that they could monetize that they were able to really, gain the dominant position that they have today. But this notion of spending time truly innovating on the business model in terms of cost, delivery, service, expansion, I've really come to value that, and that wasn't the case when I started. I was very much looking at the technology and enamored with it as much as the business, but now I spend probably more time trying to understand the dynamics, because what I found in looking at the failures is that it was really related to execution issues on the business model. It wasn't that the technology didn't work. The technology almost always works. It does its job, but it's the ability to tell the story, to find a viable distribution models, to scale that distribution, to do it in a profitable way, to understand how to repeat it, to, as a venture growth business, to truly grow it, know when to do that. That's a little trickier sometimes.
That's the story of Salesforce and SaaS.
Yes.
Completely changed everything.
Exactly. And you can point to, Dave Parker, locally here, spends a lot of time cataloging and thinking about the different types of business models that there are. And so if you look at Mary Meeker, who was just a prominent investment banker, analyst from Morgan Stanley, now has her own venture capital firm, all of her reports are very much focused, and the early ones are great, because it really chronicles the evolution of business models as it related to the internet. And interestingly enough, it's not a huge set of business models, but you still are charged with the notion of figuring out how to execute within those business models. And some of those conversations with an entrepreneur can be challenging. They can be a little tricky. And at first, I was providing advice to entrepreneurs, but later I learned that the best way to provide advice is not by offering advice, but by presenting the question to the entrepreneur. The power is in the question. And so have you thought about that particular path and let the entrepreneur really unwind and pull on that thread and understand the implications of specific dynamics, because that's their baby. They've spent a long time nurturing and harnessing that and being able to find effective ways as a director to help them see potential risks with their model. Doing that delicately in an open manner, there's more of an art to that than I initially expected at the beginning of my tenure.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Sharon
Yes.
Martinez.
Yes.
First, I want to say thank you very much for the journey
Mhm.
of where you've been and where you are today. So our organization is a little bit different. We're not a technology company.
Mm.
We are a nonprofit organization that is helping those who don't have access to their bits because they don't have access to even
Anything.
And so my question is whether or not that there's an appetite for investors to support organizations that are indirectly still impacting the tech industry by ensuring that youth and young adults who don't have access then have the access to technology, but then eventually become the innovators of the future that drive a different set of technology.
It's a great question, and I'm really very passionate about that. I believe everyone should have access. I mean, you just have to. It's electricity and water of today. And so I gave a talk some years ago about the commoditization of IT, and that is that it is exactly at that level where you cannot succeed, you cannot function without access. You just can't. And so the question then, who cares and who should care about that? At the end of the day, having having everyone online, given that we've decided to be online, would seem that it would expand market opportunity. It would facilitate communication. And so you look at the other side, we have this saying, the rule of the reasonable opposite. And the rule of the reasonable opposite would say, what if everybody didn't have access? What would that mean? And that's the reality that we're living today, right? And so you end up with disproportionate imbalances in terms of access, in terms of being operated, in terms of being able to function across a myriad of different choices. It's just incredible. You can't get on a plane, you can't go back. The list is huge, absolutely huge. And so the question then goes back to from my perspective, in whose interest is it to be able to solve this problem? My perspective is that it is in everyone's interest to be able to solve this problem, because we have no idea who might not be online today that could get online that might have a disproportionate impact and effect on all of our lives. And no one can decide or be able to point to who that individual might be. And so let's get all of us online and be able to participate in this new economy, because we are absolutely creating and have created a new economy that is going to define the way of interaction from going forward. It just is.
Okay. And so you do believe that there's an appetite for investors? I know it's different.
Well, the question is, and so who invests? And I go back to that question. So is it a public, so is it government agencies? It seems like it's pretty fundamental from that perspective. You look at specific communities that are underserved. And so there seems like there should be an investment in the same way that you take care of your roads and you take care of your light posts, and you take care of your water systems. IT and access to good old TCP/IP should fall into that same category. And so you have that level of capability. Now, the other one is, it used to be the argument that the infrastructure costs were too high. And so I remember doing this work when I was at Gartner and talking about what the total cost of wiring the country would be. And at that point, we were dealing with the new advent of fiber optic lines. And so we did the calculation, and we're struggling to figure out how to make that happen. The beauty of what's changed from now versus then is the advent of wireless. And so you no longer have to lay the spaghetti. And so now you can actually have wireless systems that have more than sufficient bandwidth. Even if you have to meter it and throttle it, you have the ability to be able to deliver those services without incurring those infrastructure costs to actually deploy the technology. And so there are options if we really wanted to do that.
Enrique was always my favorite venture capitalist, and I only realized one reason for that in the past, and tonight I realize a second reason. So the first reason is, having raised money from, I don't know how many investors over the years, doing 10 startups, it's guaranteed, I never got funded by Enrique, but he always gave me the time, respect, and ideas, and go here, try that. I didn't realize you were using the Socratic method of teaching by asking me questions. I also went to high school in Bronx High School of Science, and the best teacher in that school's history was my constitutional law teacher. In junior and senior year, won many awards as a teacher and a legal scholar for using the Socratic method of teaching. I'm going to try to adopt more of that, mentoring startups now. But I did want to thank you for being very different from, and I am going to ask the melanin question too, like, how much of that came from your empathy with the entrepreneur? How much of that came from the fact that you were living in a white man's world here? How much of that impact the way you interacted with entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think so being an exception in so many different places that I've been, and for the most part, actually for every part, I've been treated well and fairly. And as a result of that, always felt that everybody else should be treated exactly that same way. And have just, of course, you do this. Candidly, I just don't know any other way.
Let's ask the reasonable opposite. What
Do
about
it.
all the peers of venture capital who consider it a blood sport?
Yeah. That's a better question. I think it's an interesting question. I think we're in fascinating times. I'm a strong believer in never let a good crisis go to waste. And we're seeing some interesting dynamics in public policy at a national level related to DEI initiatives. And so there were promises made and now promises backtracked. And I do believe, again, being the product of affirmative action, and I think about, in my life, I've been able to make 750 millionaires. Right? And this is coming from the Bronx and doing what I did. I don't know, I think from an affirmative action perspective, and the folks at HUP and here, they kind of got their money's worth. I gave back, I've been giving back, and I just know that there are other people that have an opportunity to do the same thing if afforded that chance. And so the idea that you can fall back on the affirmative action of generational wealth is just something that I don't subscribe to. And so I'm very concerned about that dynamic. And for me, I just spent a lot of time thinking about that. I think we just have this conversation and this discourse at the core that says that we want to be made to believe that there is scarcity. We want to be made to believe that there's scarcity of bandwidth, that there's scarcity of dollars, that there's scarcity of talent, of jobs, and nothing could be further from the truth. We exist in a world, especially in this country, in a world of abundance. There is an abundance of everything, and we have proved time and time again that we know how to produce prosperity. We just do that. But if you say it enough that, no, there's scarcity, and you really do need to protect those things that you have, in that exercise, we compromise the opportunities that we are unaware of that are still in front of us, that we don't know about. And so the idea that diversity as a way of being able to bring in different vectors to help inform the critical decisions that we need to make wouldn't be valuable just is troubling.
So you spent the last 5 years traveling the country in an RV.
I did.
I think you said 33 states?
I did. We spent, my wife and I did an exploration of innovation in America. So we jumped in an RV in 2016 and visited 33 states, visiting economic development offices, universities, accelerators. My world the last couple of years was entrepreneurship. And I said before, entrepreneurship is innovation and monetization. And what I wanted to do is, what if you remove monetization from the equation? What do people invent? What are people doing? What are people creating? And it was just a fascinating exercise to be able to just experience that firsthand in terms of what's really happening in this country. What are the resources? And it was formative in the sense of understanding the distinctions between urban centers and non-urban centers, and how those evolve. What do you do when you have no bandwidth? What do you do when you have no resources? Understanding the impact of centralization, the 1-2 impact of, from an e-commerce and a community equity perspective, of Walmart and Amazon and small and medium businesses across this country is extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. And as a result of removing that revenue opportunity, boy, it's really had a pretty darn significant impact. The other part is people struggling with understanding what innovation means and how to provide economic development activities. I was in the Bronx meeting with the Bronx borough president of a previous president. 1.4 million people in the Bronx is like, no, people talk about New York being an economic ecocenter, but what they really mean is Manhattan, and to a lesser extent, Brooklyn. And no, I want the Bronx to be on this map as well. I said, good for you. That makes a lot of sense. So how are we going to do that? I'm going to lift the Bronx. No, that's not how it happened in Medellin, Colombia. When they were trying to get past Escobar, they decided to do a Ruta N and bring a collaboration of a university and academia and Hewlett-Packard. And it was in one region, and then it grew from there. East London, same thing. Berlin, same thing. Australia. And so you start regionally because the things that we do require a rate of pace that depends on density, depends on cultural structure, depends on government policies, and to think about doing this at the level of a borough just doesn't make an awful lot of sense. And so I see a lot of folks that are flailing, for lack of a better word, to try and understand how to develop a viable entrepreneurial ecosystem. And again, there's just no good science around this. I really applaud the Kauffman Foundation for the work they do in helping to promote best practices for being able to support thriving entrepreneurial ecosystems across the stages that they are. Because they really are things that you can do to help promote and support those that are moving from being consumers to being producers of new and interesting things that hopefully more of us take advantage of.
This is why you're so focused in Kitsap County?
I am, exactly right. We are. This is another great place it's a beautiful place to live. And yeah, so after coming back from my RV trip, we thought we were going to be coming back to this side of the pond, but decided that Seattle had changed quite a bit. And we liked the region, but wanted to explore other opportunities and ended up settling in the Kitsap Peninsula, where we're really loving it. It's really quite an experience. And so working together with Elena, who owns a co-working space, really trying to create a new effort there that we're calling Matchstick Lab to help promote entrepreneurship in that region. And so folding in some of the lessons that we've learned along the way and some of the resources. In the Bronx, 25% of everybody in the Bronx is in the healthcare field. 1.4 million people, 25% in healthcare.
Wow.
Most of them commute to Manhattan. So those buses and trains are full of people that have to leave home to go work in Manhattan and then come back home. In traffic, takes hours. It's a weird thing about Kitsap. There's a lot of people in Kitsap that live there and work here and substitute buses for ferries, and you have the same dynamic. And what if you could actually be home? And this isn't just an example here, but if you go to Philly, you go to Minnesota, you go to different places, it's this notion of being able to say, no, I want to be able to have a viable growth opportunity where I am. And so if we can find ways of codifying that and accelerating that, and there's an interest in doing that, but I think matching that interest with the capital and the leadership and the insight to be able to drive that, I think is critical for being able to move that forward. And so at Matchstick, we're really focused on the education aspect, we're very focused on the investment aspect, and then finally the storytelling aspect. And the storytelling is really key of being able to say, if you go to Tampa, Florida, and the work that's happened there with their accelerator, it's just incredible the job that they've done in just bringing a set of resources together, public-private partnership, recognizing the goals, and allowing that to surface. Same thing in Hawaii. I think so there's examples of good success cases, but there isn't structured ways of being able to share that insight. And so we're just trying to find ways of being able to get that to happen for all of our benefits here in the Puget Sound area, but then have just more proof positive cases of what can happen in other parts of the world.
It's pretty slick you're able to get your RV to Hawaii. Give Alana the mic here.
Elena.
And talk a little bit more about what you guys are saying, what you guys are doing together over there in Kitsap.
You summed it up really well. Yeah. So I opened UpGlobal as a co-working space in 2018. So we've been around for about 6 years. And it was one of those things, I'm originally from the area, left when I was 17, was gone for 17 years, and came back because my family's there and wanted to be close to family. But it was one of those things where it was why is it that if we can't be, to do the work that you love, from the place that you love was not a possibility for me growing up. It was like you had a couple different options, and if not, you had to leave. You had to go to Seattle, bigger cities. I was all over the world. And with the technology that we have today, it should be every bit possible to do that work from there and do it on a global scale. So neither be restricted to having to be small local businesses either, but actually do things that were globally significant, regionally significant. So it started as a co-working space, I think partly from my background and passion and realizing I'm not the only one who wants to do big things from our little place over on the peninsulas. Has evolved more and more into a lot of this programming work, this community ecosystem building work that we are just now peeling off of the co-working space and officially setting up its own entity as Matchstick Lab. And I feel very fortunate to be able to count with Enrique's expertise and be able to glean what he's gained and his experience all over the world to say, how do we create a model here that is great for the specific Northwest region, but again, can be expanded in a lot of other places too.
Anybody else have questions?
Thank you for this talk. One question I did have is, started Voyager Capital in '96. It's been around this whole time, 27 years. What do you think kept you guys going for this long, especially after the 01 bubble crash, 08? What kept you guys going? What kept you guys going, really?
And do you mean operationally or mentally? Or both? Yeah. So operationally, the business models of the venture capital world is that you actually are afforded some time to be able to generate value for your investors. And so venture capital funds are typically structured as 10-year partnerships. And so for a fund that was raised, say, in 2000, you really have until 2010 to be able to see some returns, and then you have the opportunity to extend that. And so structurally, venture capital funds have some advantages that afford you some time to execute against what's called the J-curve, some negative returns at the beginning, and then you start seeing some positive returns as the investments that you made early on start to exit and deliver returns back to your investors. Your other question, but mentally, it's believing in opportunities, believing in the region. I think this is so having literally driven around the country for 4 years, this is a really special place. This is a really special place. It just is. The combination of geographic beauty, intellectual capital, and good-hearted people, I think, is fairly unique. I think there's, when you go to the Valley, you go to the East Coast, you go to Chicago, there's a bit more of an aggressive, there's greater interest in changing my world than in changing the world, right? And I think there's actually a well-honed perspective on really being able to do meaningful and interesting work here. I think one of the things that I think is lacked is what I call unimpeachable leadership. Is leadership that actually takes the helm and takes responsibility for helping to galvanize all the resources that we have together. So when the dot-com bust happened in 2002, the venture capital community dried up, and so we had capital to invest, but we had to be more selective. And so our criteria went way up. The entrepreneurs are still here, and the angel investors didn't have that same requirement. And so they were able to continue to keep investing. But one of the things that they did during that, where they is the angel investors, is that they trimmed their expectations in line with the overall climate. And so specifically, they'd meet with entrepreneurs and say, I really like your idea, but I think it's a little too aggressive. And if you could just trim that idea a little bit, and so if we agree that you can build your business, and as long as you can get an exit opportunity that's of that we agree that you're going to exit in the first place. You're not going to run this gun forever. Maybe it's IPO, but if there's an opportunity to exit earlier, that we'll pursue that we'd do that we'd exit earlier. And a lot of entrepreneurs did. And so if you look at the data for the Seattle market, there were a lot of exits that happened in that period of time that were sub-maximum value potential. And there were exits that were essentially realized and could have kept going and could have continued to build value and have a bigger footprint, but didn't. And I think that dynamic created a habit. And I think that there's still, and you'll hear it even from the VCs in town, you'll hear it still, that the entrepreneurs in the region are still not being big and bold enough in terms of thinking about ways to actually dominate a market in the way that other regions and entrepreneurs in other geographies do. I think we have everything that's required here to do that, but I think we have a cultural dynamic that has stood in the way of being able to do that on a sustainable basis. We'll get the episodic unicorn popping out here and there, but we are punching under our weight with respect to the impact that we could have on the global technology scene. And it's unfortunate because I think that we bring a different heart to the things that we do in a way that would deliver results that would add value beyond the actual deliverable that particular company provides. And so we're excited by the overall opportunity, but I'm also hoping that we're going to step up in a way of being able to say, no, let's actually go big. And let's actually go big and go find ways of being able to take these innovations and deliver them Washington style.
Chicago? You're an answer. I just appreciate you sharing your story tonight. It's been fascinating.
Thank you.
Go ahead. You got a question for Greg in there?
Not one that comes to mind. Again, I appreciate the discussion you guys have had tonight, both of you, by the way. And appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you all for all the tremendous work that you're doing. It's not easy. It really isn't. Thank you.
This has been a great conversation. I'm still looking at all your technology that you got over there. I felt...
How much is a ticket to the museum?
How much is a ticket to the museum? But I say museum in a reverent way because it reminds me of, with my technology, I can think of, I had a Motorola V635, and I was in college, right? And that was, the Motorola V635 had video calling.
Yes.
Before we had FaceTime. So I had this phone back in 2006. I used to get all my phones from Japan, right? So I remember having the screen on my phone, and on the advertisement, it had somebody doing video call, and I'm like, why can't I video call?
Yeah.
So just to see how the use of our technology and how it represents periods of our lives and changes in our lives, it's really refreshing to see that, because with every piece of technology, there's a story behind it. And I want you just to, before we close out, you said something about you were the first person to send a fax from.
And
which one was that?
My brother needed the phone, and so I sent it to him, and so he has it. But AT&T had developed a capability to connect your cell phone to a computer in a way, and it was called a PC connector, a little black box, and it linked these two things together. And so now you could really be untethered in a way that we had never been before. And so I remember one, he said, I wonder how broad this is. And so I grabbed my Microtac phone, my AT&T modem, and my laptop computer, and drove to Yosemite National Park. And I put it in my backpack, and I hiked up Yosemite Falls. And from the top of Yosemite Falls, I sent the fax. And this was in 1995 or so. And I'm pretty sure it was the first fax ever sent from Yosemite Falls. But it was a way, again, it goes back to the research environment of trying it, of kicking the tires, of exploring. You can't break anything. And so just keep trying and just keep pushing forward. And the only thing I know is that, those past experiences really inform what you do next. But at the same time, I know that we're not done. We have just so many things to be able to do. And right now, we've isolated the technology from our actual lives, especially as it relates to people and groups of people and each other. And I'm just looking forward to the innovations that actually help us to more rapidly identify that common ground and more rapidly support interpersonal computing in a way that computing hasn't really done yet. Thank you.
Mr. Godreau, this is
Thank you.
great. This is great. On behalf of Black Founders and Funders, thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing your journey as well. Everyone, Mr. Enrique Godreau.
Thank you.